All right, I feel a little bit more comfortable doing these without the document camera, so I'm going to try and do a second one for you. And just talk to you about the estate system. So the medieval estate system was basically the way that we view social classes, but because of how they lived, what they valued, and kind of how things were set up in this medieval era, the early thousands, their values on things were a little bit different. So instead of being classified by what you had, instead you were classified by what you did, who you served. And obviously you can see on our little doobobber here, the most important thing was how closely your job served the Lord. Because we had set up this strong system of Christianity tied back to the Catholic Church, tied back to Rome. And so the closer you were in service to the Lord, the higher you were basically in your class system, regardless of money, regardless of any of those things. So you have some notes, and I'm not going to go word by word through these notes. That's certainly something you can handle doing. These come from Cal Poly, so they're actually really good. They go into detail about kind of these different estates, is what they would call them. We would call it like a class, like an upper class, a middle class, but they call it the first and second and third estate. And what I want to go over with you guys really quickly is just some of the basics, and then you can fill this out pretty easily. I've got my little text tool. What I want you to understand about the first estate is this was those who prayed. This is what was important in this estate. And this was going to be people who directly served the Lord, directly served the church, even though they didn't necessarily have the kind of money or land or things like that lords might have. They were still seen as higher. They were still seen as more important because their jobs directly interacted with the church and with God. They were the conduit for God's word on earth. Underneath that was what was considered the second estate. And this was those who ruled, or in the Cal Poly notes, you'll see it said those who fought. So this is going to be your lords and your ladies and your dukes and your duchesses and your knights and your squires. Like, this is the people who keep in place the system that the first estate is basically putting out there. The church says this is what has to happen, so the lords and the knights kind of enforce it all. And then this third estate here, this is going to be those who worked. And I'll show you how I've divided it in just a minute, but this is pretty much everybody else. And it's not like a complete lower class. Don't look at it like upper, middle, lower the way that we see it. What I want you to think about is, remember, what we're placing value in this time period is how closely you were to the church, to the Lord. And so everybody else kind of services this big machine that services the church. So all of the people here are serving those who rule and those who fight and those who keep in system what the church has put in place. So within this third estate, we're even still going to break it down a little bit more. And again, you can see like this talks 1, 2, 3, first, second, and third estates. And then they talk about a couple different, you have a mercantile class, you have intellectuals. There's a little bit more going on in this third estate because, like I said, it's not a lower class. It's those who work. It's those who hold up, who prop up this whole system, basically. It's like little legs, right? Got little legs holding you up. And then I will post this later. What I don't want you guys doing is copying because I want you to read this stuff. But within your third estate, you have what was considered the new working class. This was something that was completely new. Remember, we're coming from complete feudal systems where you had like warlords and peasantry. And so now you have the idea of like, oh, hey, some people can actually do jobs and make money and have very comfortable living. So they weren't just workers. And then you have junk. Whoops, this is middle. I didn't mean working. Whoops, sorry. The middle class. The idea of the middle class was new. Then you had your working class. And this is going to be the people who typically they're going to be in the harder jobs, the ones that are more physical. These are your blue collar workers. The middle class is going to be your white collar workers. They're dealing with indoor things. They're dealing with money. They're dealing with education. They're dealing with intellectual property. Whereas the actual working class, they're the ones getting their hands dirty. You have a lot of people like running farms and animals and miller, all these people doing the physical labor of this time period. And then there is kind of this additional created group that Chaucer was kind of picking at. And this is where it comes into when we talk about an estate satire. Remember that a satire is when we are picking fun at something or criticizing something, but through opposites, through being overly exaggerating or overly nice, and you're supposed to infer like, oh wait, that's not really what's going on. So we had this other group known as the degraded, what did I call them? I called them degraded. They weren't really lower class, but they had jobs which really kind of should put them up here in this second or first estate. But because of how they went about them and how they handled those things, they end up being a little bit, they're thought of very poorly. They're characterized very poorly by Chaucer. And as you get through that part of the prologue, you'll see that how he describes them is kind of is gross, and the type of job they're doing, it may actually service the church, which should put them up here. They should feel, special, but the way they're doing their jobs, and there was a lot of problems with this Catholic system in the early thousands, and these are the things that you may have learned led to stuff like the Protestant Reformation, and you had all of the ideas of the Catholic indulgences and being able to buy pardons, and if you had money, you could basically buy your way into heaven according to the church at that time. And so the more corrupt you were, that's kind of the people that we're putting down here in this degraded lower class. They still probably had plenty of money, and they lived fine, but their character is what was significantly lower. So as you go through the prologue, you'll see there's 29 different characters that Chaucer mentions, and you're going to work at putting them in here in this list here. So the characters will go in this triangle, and then I've typed some stuff here, but you can look at my notes later, or you can take some notes from here and just kind of give a little bit extra to the description of these different groups. All right.